All right, John Middlekauff, the former NFL scout hired by Andy Reid, is already in New Orleans. I am leaving in the morning as we are doing this in the late afternoon on Tuesday, as I've overcome my very dramatic bailing on the show. We've already talked about that, and that's boring. Okay, this game comes down to a couple of things for me. So let's just do one Eagles Chiefs rant. Then we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Is that Mahomes is 7 for 7. I mean, this is the greatest that have ever done this. Breeze and Brady were about 50%. Mahomes is 7 for 7 on game tying / game winning drives in the playoffs. Okay, 7 for 7. Vic Fangio, the Eagles defensive coordinator, is 0 for 8 against Patrick Mahomes. So we know that coaching and quarterbacking largely decides these games. The Niners outplayed and had a better roster against the Chiefs years ago, and Garoppolo missed on a deep ball. I mean, we know that Patrick Mahomes, the Eagles had them in big trouble a couple years ago, and Mahomes came up with a huge scramble that was the difference in the game. We know this is going to be a coach, a Spags, Fangio, Reid, Mahomes, Hurts, Nick Sirianni game, and that's why I favor Kansas City. You know, it's interesting. I think a lot of fans think most quarterbacks are great in crisis. We know Lamar's not. We know early Peyton Manning wasn't. Um, we know Elway was, but went a long time before he actually won the very end of his career. When you watch Mahomes as a former scout, what makes him? I mean, a lot of guys move. A lot of guys are accurate. I mean, I could say that about Favre and Rodgers. He's perfect in these game-tying, game-winning playoff drives. As a scout, if you just watched him and you didn't know who he was playing for, like what's his secret sauce?
I was actually, there was an NFL player on my flight and we were delayed a long time and we were talking about him and he was talking about the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. And when you blitz him in these big games, he kills you. I mean, we know in the regular season, but blitz is, think who he goes against every day in practice for the last 6, 7 years. The best blitzing defensive coordinator in the history of the league. So he's very calm that way. Well, when you get pressure with just the front four, when they played D'Amico Ryans and the Houston Texans, and they have a good pass rush. They got two really good defensive ends. He can handle crisis when it's just four coming, and his offensive line, Colin. It's not exactly like Tony Baselli and Larry Allen were blocking for him this year.
Right, right.
So they were winning games all season long, playing in pretty chaotic situations. They were not an explosive offense. They could not really protect him, but he can protect himself. And I don't know if it goes back to, I had a front row seat for many years in the Bay Area of Clay and Steph. Those guys kind of grew up around it. And they were just a little more calmness to them with the lights being the brightest because they had been that way since they were 5, 6 years old going to these arenas. And you have to wonder with Patrick Mahomes. I saw a picture, A-Rod holding him, when Patrick was like 5 years old. Like Patrick's kind of used to these. And listen, baseball when he was growing up was a pretty big deal. So
Yes.
his dad, a lot of people, when you bring up Mahomes to older people, they know him. But yeah, that reliever. So
Yeah.
I think there's just a natural calmness. And then, he's playing for, I've been saying it for a while, the chubby, I used to call him the chubby Bill Walsh, but have you seen Coach Reid? He's eating healthy. He's slimmed down.
You know what? You brought up something that's really interesting for our listeners and our viewers to this is that one I told somebody a couple of years ago, I said, man, this Brock Bowers kid, here's why I know he's going to be great. Because every day at Georgia practice, he's going up against first round corners and safeties. Every day is an NFL
Yeah.
practice at Georgia. That's why you have to question. I mean, Khalil Mack's been great out of Buffalo, but when Trey Lance comes out of a smaller school, or a player that comes out of a smaller university like the Genty, the running back for Boise State, your takeaway is okay, maybe he has one big game against a good school, but what happens when you're on the road for a quarterback or you're on the road and playing in front of 80,000 against NFL people? So Brock Bowers, by the time he got to the NFL, I mean, most of the defenses aren't as good as Georgia was his last year in college. And he was
Yeah.
eating. I mean, so even as a freshman out of Napa High School, I'm watching him. I'm like, this kid's just dominant in the SEC. Who you go against? Well, you mentioned something about Mahomes going up against Spags, and I think it's a great point. Don't we both probably acknowledge now that the reason Brady was so efficient and sharp against mixed coverages is because Belichick had practice? I mean, just think about that. When you go, when you're a great high school football player, and a lot of these great high school football players, they transfer. Like in LA, there's like four really well-known high schools, like DeMatha, right? These kind of great schools. Well, because you're dominating lesser competition. So then you go to practice and you go to DeMatha or something, one of these top schools, maybe it's Hoover in Alabama. Well, now you're competing every day against Division I players when you're 17, 18, 19. So you're ready to play at Georgia, Alabama, LSU when you come on as a freshman. And I think this is the unspoken part about Mahomes that you touched on. He has spags every day experimenting. And I think it sharpens his knife.
Think about when Brady really popped. I think Peyton Manning, he's compared to a lot. Their paths were they weren't similar at all. I mean, Peyton kind of by his second year was hitting the ground running, and he carried that franchise for a long period of time. Brady, for the first 4 or 5 years, every day in practice, Mike Vrabel, Teddy Bruschi, Rodney Harrison, Asante Samuel, right? I mean, think of all the good Richard Seymour. I mean, that's what he really honed his skills from 2001 to 2006. And then he really popped '07 on when they brought it, and he became Peyton Manning. I can carry the offense and carry the franchise. So it definitely matters. Why are physical teams physical? Well, because why could Alabama always run it down people's throat? Well, they were going up against the best defense. Same with Kirby Smart. Why are Jim Harbaugh's offenses always able to run the ball and always tough? Well, look at his defenses. I remember going to his practices against Vic Fangio and thinking, well, this offense, with Alex and Kaepernick, they had some issues throwing the ball, but they always could run the ball. Why? Because in practice, to run it on Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Justin Smith, Navarro Bowman, and Aldon Smith, and all these guys, I mean, it's hard to get a yard. So the games are easy. And I can't even imagine the last couple of years of practice for Patrick Mahomes. Just can you imagine as over the next, like one thing's pretty clear about Andy Reid, he will acquire better players moving forward. And they feel like they like Xavier Worthy a lot. Well, don't be shocked if, Travis is going to retire. They'll add another tight end. They'll add a running back. He will have a second iteration of skill guys. And he will be on a whole nother level mentally. Because physically, I mean, he's 30 years old. He's in the prime of his physical life. So mentally, watch out. You're getting, and that's what you've got. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady's. And that's been the difference of him and Josh and Lamar. I mean, you've been watching football longer than me, but Josh and Lamar are two of the more pure talents in the history of the league, are they not?
Yeah, no question.
So, I mean, they've just run into a guy and a coaching staff that's kind of mastered their craft.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. Mahomes didn't get more athletic. He didn't get a stronger arm. What has Mahomes done over the last 2 years? He's gotten much more efficient, much greater on like third down. Why? Well, because he doesn't have the escape route. He doesn't have Zeke. He doesn't have Tyreek Hill. So Mahomes, as this Chiefs defense has been drafted and developed and has become a monster the last 2 to 3 years, to practices. I mean, when he came into the league, he had Tyreek Hill, and the Chiefs' defenses were okay. Yeah. Now they're great. And so I think practice matters. Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video. It's funny. During Alabama's 15-year dynasty, I only thought maybe one of their teams was one of the best I'd ever seen. I thought it was the greatest overall dynasty, but I didn't think they had some of the best teams. I think the best SEC team I've ever seen is the Joe Burrow LSU team that, I mean, literally had like 8 good pros. Now, they didn't have as good a coaching, but I thought that was the most talented team I'd ever seen out of the SEC was the LSU Joe Burrow team. And I thought the USC teams with Pete Carroll were all-time stuff. I thought there were a couple of Miami Hurricane teams that I thought were all-time stuff. I didn't think the Clemson teams were all-time stuff, or most of Saban's. I do think the Spurs historically were underrated because I think Manu Ginobili is the best sixth man in league history. You had Tony Parker was a perennial all-star running the show. Tim Duncan was the great fundamental and one of the great coaches. I always thought those teams were better. Bruce Bowen. They just had a lot of really smart, high IQ players in close games, but they never won back-to-back, so I didn't think they're one of the great teams. Shaq and Kobe, yes. I don't think the Miami Heat were. They were small. I mean, if you remember, it was like Joel Anthony, Udonis Haslem were their bigs. Chris Bosh was, pushed out to shoot, corner threes. So not every team dynasty is great. New England's most talented teams had Randy Moss, and they didn't win a Super Bowl. So when I look at New England's all-time teams, I think they're the best coached and quarterbacked. If the Chiefs won 3 in a row, where do we put them as an all-time great team? So I grew up with the Steelers in the 70s where there was no mobility. They had like 8 Hall of Famers. They were there forever. They had like a 3-year run. You couldn't score on them. There were some Raider teams, the Kenny Stabler Raider teams that were insane. That just, I mean, I can still name the players. I could go
Had like 10 Hall of Famers, didn't they?
Yeah, it was insane. I remember them. It's just from the Art Shells and Villapianos and Matuzaks and Cliff Branch and Jim Otto and Dave Casper and shit, man. It was like every unit had a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
You don't get that. Now, I think the Niners and the Cowboys, their last, like those Bill Walsh, Joe Montana Niner teams were stacked. Jimmy Johnson, a couple of those Cowboy teams, those are different. I kind of put the Patriots in the New England, what's available with today's salary cap dynasty, which is best coach, best quarterback, arguably on the opposite side of the head coach, best coordinator, a little undervalued in terms of roster composition, tremendous circumstantially, tremendous in the red zone offense and defense. But I don't think the Chiefs, I think they're more entertaining than the Patriots. I don't consider this one of the great teams I've ever watched if they win a third.
Yeah, I mean, from a roster standpoint, they wouldn't. I mean, the team that I kind of grew up on was more Steve Young, but in '94 they signed Deion Sanders in the peak of his powers,
Yes.
and they somehow had a top 10 pick, and they drafted Bryant Young, who was the Rookie of the Year. So they added Deion Sanders, Bryant Young to Jerry Rice, Steve Young, Brent Jones. It was an unfair team, I mean, they had Ken Norton, Eric Davis. Like they were those individual '90s teams, roster Cowboys and Niners. Even the Favre team with Favre in the peak of his powers with Reggie White. I mean, listen, what Andy's doing, he's going to go, if they win this, it's the greatest run, I think, I've seen in my life. I mean, This would be their 4th Super Bowl in 5 years or 6 years. They've won 3 in a row. I don't think that ever happens again. And I think we throw that out a lot. Never going to happen again. Never going to happen again. Like, I don't think that's ever happening again if he wins this game. I mean, it's insane that he's even got to this point. I mean, last year he was an underdog twice on the road at Buffalo and Lamar, 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and beat them both. And then the Niner team, who was awesome last year, is like a defining moment for the era, I think, winning those 3 straight games. Buffalo, Baltimore, and the 49ers. Like, he wins this game, that's awesome. It was more impressive what they did. Last year was kind of, to me, the icing on the cake, and everything is just kind of cherries and sprinkles on top since. Like, last year was an all-timer. The 98 Bulls, who they literally did a documentary for, like, when you watch highlights of Michael moving around, you're like, Google or YouTube 1991 Michael running around. It's not even close, but you get more credit because you have the buildup. Tiger Woods won the U.S. Open in 2008 with a torn ACL and a broken leg. Like, that wasn't the best version of him, but that adds to kind of the legend of sports, right? Michael Jordan, Tom Brady coming back from 28-3. Right? Like you said, the teams were much more explosive. Now, it is a team game, right? So in 2007 and in 2011, you could argue those teams were more explosive, but their team wasn't as good as some of the latter years with the Edelmans, the McCourtys, the Hightowers, the Gronks. That's what I would say about this Chiefs team. They are a complete unit. They're not the sexiest. They don't have Jerry Rice running out. They don't have, McDuffie's a good player. No one's going to confuse him with, Deion Sanders or Darrelle Revis, but they are a championship unit. And I think they've become kind of what Alabama's teams, not all of them were the same, but if you were going to beat them in a big game, you better bring your A game because they had just the championship mojo, the championship medal. I just can't bet. Like, this Eagles team is loaded. I mean, if Jalen just plays okay, which if you put Patrick Mahomes on this Eagles team, I think the Eagles be favored by like a touchdown.
Right? I think I would take Philadelphia to blow them out. There's some numbers on Jalen Hurts, and this is another reason I like Kansas City. When Jalen Hurts doesn't face pressure, he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. When he does, he's like 30th. So when you get him to be pressured, well, Spags from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarters, it's top 10, top 5, top 6 pressures in the league. So the key to the game is, can Spags create pressure on Jalen Hurts?
Yeah.
If they can, they win the game because Jalen Hurts, and Greg Cosell's been saying this to me all year, the film doesn't lie. He's a pretty average pocket passer if you put pressure on him. He deteriorates very quickly.
AJ wasn't
And
reading the book on the sideline randomly. I mean, he's trying not to snap.
yeah. So in the end, I think it comes down to, if I know what Kansas City's going to try to do. They'll bring some surprises offensively and special teams. They're going to try to put pressure on Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Philadelphia can't. If you bring any sort of blitz package on Mahomes, he'll eat you alive. So you just have to hope you win one-on-one battles, which they're certainly capable of. But they do have rookie corners, and rookie corners in big spots. I think Andy probably looks at Philadelphia's secondary and thinks, boy, these guys are talented, and boy, these guys are really young. And I mean, that to me is Kansas City's game plan. Attack the young corners, make them earn their pay, give them, multiple sets, throw things at them they have not seen at practice, and catch them off guard.
I think the one thing is that the Chiefs, or excuse me, the Eagles, when healthy, have the best offensive line in the league. I
Yes.
mean, Lane Johnson's Hall of Famer. Mailata is one of the greatest seventh round Australian stories in the history of the league. But, in that NFC Championship game, what happened? They had two centers. I mean, one guy's a guard who had to bump to center who are injured. One has a back and one has a knee. Now, I would imagine they're both going to try to play. I would say it's a 50-50 chance. One of them you're in the trenches against Chris Jones. What if all of a sudden Cam Jurgens' back tightens up or Landon Dickerson's knee feels a little weird? That could get weird fast, and all of a sudden you got a domino effect inside, and then Spags just attacks. But the Eagles, when healthy, are equipped just with the size and how talented they are, and Goddard, who's a really all-around good tight end, to, in theory, handle it. But Jalen is you just never know what you're going to get. You saw Washington, which he had best game of the season. Washington's not very good on defense. I mean,
Yeah.
So it's just look at him against Green Bay, who was a solid defense, right? And the other thing is the Chiefs, I have a hard time seeing Saquon bust a couple 40, 50-yard runs against them. They're the best tackling team in the league. Like all 11 other guys, most teams, they're front seven tackles, right? They're D-line linebackers. All the Chiefs DBs hit. All of them. This is what the Niners have had over the Kyle Shanahan era. When your corners and your safeties all tackle like linebackers, you're pretty hard to play. Because while I'm not decapitating you, John Lynch style, 1996, I'm still hitting you really, really hard. And that's what the Chiefs do a really good job of. So to me, there's a physicality element, and that's in the post-Tyreek Hill era. Because remember, when they beat the 49ers, their defense, Spags had just got there. The defense was kind of in question. It has become, it's a new school defense because we don't play like we once did. But in terms of physicality, they are easily one of the more physical teams in the league. And to me, it's like, Saquon, you're not doing anything on us. Jalen beat us. And in theory, he should be able to beat him because he has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I mean, the two guys make $200 million. But the Chiefs probably feel pretty good that McDuffie can at least handle one of them, right, and just keep him in front of them. And then it's can the other guy make a lot of big plays. And Goddard. The Chiefs have been a little susceptible over the middle of the field because, I mean, you're just going to have some openings in the defense. And Goddard we don't talk about him like we do the Kelseys, the Kittles. Like, he's pretty damn good. So, yep. I mean, I'd look for Goddard. If you tell me the Eagles win, I think it's less likely that Saquon goes for like 150 yards. I think it's more likely I can see Dallas Goedert having 120 yards and a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, Goddard and the McBride from Arizona are the two tight ends in the league that get overshadowed, that are just fantastic players. They are wildly productive, and they're very good in big spots, big third downs and big spots. This isn't a little itty-bitty, teeny-tiny bowl. It's the Super Bowl. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is the key to hoisting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. New DraftKings customers can bet just $5. That's it, $5 to get 200 in bonus bets instantly. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Takes 90 seconds max. Please use the code Colin, C-O-L-I-N. Use that code, C-O-L-I-N, for new customers. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets, and you'll get it instantly. All you have to do is bet $5. That's it. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. But it was interesting, if you watched Ohio State, they were the most expensive team money could buy in college football. And again, they practiced against each other. And by the end of the year, they were just a really well-oiled physical machine. And I think some of that comes back to facing each other. So Chip Kelly gets $6 million to go to the Raiders. And I've got to tell you, I don't mean to be a sucker, but Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, if they get a quarterback, and I do believe that a Riley Leonard, a Kyle McCord in the second or third round could actually end up falling to good teams and actually being decent franchise quarterbacks. But I kind of looked at the Raiders, and I have Max Crosby on my show Thursday at the Super Bowl, and I'm like, am I nuts to think that they're going to be viable next year if they get Shador Sanders and he can play? I mean, they have both
Well,
their tackles, they have their
I,
center.
I got to push back here, Colin. $6 million. If Vic Fangio, I would walk into Howie Roseman's room right now and say, I can't coach the Super Bowl till I make 20. I mean, Chip Kelly to be $6 million. And honestly, that just shows he wasn't dead set on leaving Ryan Day. He was making $2.5, $3 million at Ohio State. So
Yeah.
the highest paid coordinator, as we know, Liam Cohen just got 4.5. He obviously became the head coach, but that was the highest paid non-head coaching coordinator. It took $6 million to convince. So clearly Chip had to be like truly bought to show up because they don't have a quarterback. And Shador, there are like physical limitations to,
Yes.
one thing Chip likes is a running quarterback or a mobile quarterback. That's not really Shador. I think people think that because of Dion. And Brock's a stud, but they're skill guys. Jacobs is gone. Devontae's gone.
Oh, no, they did a
So
back and another
they got,
receiver.
they got a long way to go. The other thing I wonder, and people just think I'm a Chip hater. I do not care. I honestly, Chip Kelly at this point in time, 60 years old, made a ton of money, like big ego. Pete, obviously big, well accomplished. That's kind of a unique. It's one thing if they knew each other and worked. Kind of a unique setup here. I thought Pete would, if not go back to the well, get kind of a younger guy. Let's face it, Pete's going to want to play defense and run the ball. Now, in theory, Chip likes to run the ball as well. This year he was kind of forced because the receivers were so good. But I just wonder the dynamics of those two guys. Look at Pete's offensive coordinators in the pros, at least. There's a lot of Bevels, Schottenheimers, guys who were clearly not even close to on Pete's level. And I'm not saying Chip is because he hasn't accomplished what Pete has, but just in terms of his name recognition, like he's pretty famous. So that's something to me. Like I get it. They wanted to take a big. They interviewed him last year. Remember with Antonio Pierce, and they didn't go. I just. It's a lot of money. I think that's one of those. Wait, Chip Kelly is resetting the market. I thought that was kind of crazy because also it just shows that he didn't really want the job, but they made an offer so big he couldn't turn down. So like, is his heart really in it? Did he want to leave Ohio State? I think. Look at the defenses too he plays. It's the other thing with Chip. Who did they lose to really badly this year? Michigan. Well, who's their coordinator? An NFL guy, Wink Martindale. Because physical defenses can slow down his offense. Historically has when he tries to run the ball. Well, he's going up against Jim Harbaugh, who's always giving him trouble. Sean Payton's defense is one of the best in the league, and obviously Andy Reid. So that's a division for his offense that obviously has changed over time. He's not just going to run it down people's throats, right? Like he did in college. I think it's going to be a pretty big challenge. Sexy headline. I don't know. I got that one red flagged. And I like what they're doing. Spytek's a good hire. I give the Raiders a lot of credit. Pete Carroll, real hire. This was just a little weird. It's a little off the beaten path. I just sometimes those in the NFL, I think we all know, don't always work.
I talked about how obviously there was pressure down ownership to the GM at Dallas to trade Luka. Otherwise, you get far more than one great player and one draft pick. Myles Garrett says, I want out. Like Luka, he is a phenomenal once in a franchise talent. You don't get another Lawrence Taylor of the New York Giants. Like that's one. You don't get another Myles Garrett with the Cleveland Browns. He'll be the best pass rusher you'll ever have. He wants out. Who jumps out to you? Because Myles is a game changer. He is literally one of the 5 defensive players in the league that's just not blockable. Like a Chris Jones who can move around, Max Crosby, TJ Watt when he's healthy, Patrick Surtain. There's a handful of guys. They're just different. Who jumps out to you with Myles Garrett?
Yeah, I'd even go further. I think he's one of the most talented guys of the last 25 years. And you talk about Luka, knock on Luka, which is kind of stupid. I mean, I've watched him fat and score 50 points, but he's out of shape. That is not a question with Myles Garrett. I mean, you remember that video of him playing basketball when the Browns were like, we got to pull it back. He looked like an NBA player. I did a little recon, tried to compare him to what he would be like. When Reggie White left the Philadelphia Eagles to sign with the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah.
He was 32 years old. He was older. Now, part of that was the USFL, but he went on to have, a Hall of Fame career for the Packers, right?
Yes.
Pro Bowl every year. So if you look at it like that, a guy in great shape, he clearly takes his craft. Like I think they would get multiple first round picks, but you also got to give them probably $150 million. So to me, it's a lot of NFC teams. Packers, Washington. I think the Lions have to sniff around. Lot 49ers in theory, but like I just think that they got some other needs. In the sense of like, can they just use their draft picks when they're paying all these other players? It's
How
kind
about
of complicated.
Washington?
Yeah, to me, Washington, I think you think long and hard, but if you got to give two ones and a two and a player, like he's going to get a historic haul even at 29 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's difficult when you're just in year one, when you still need some of these picks. Like ideally, you'd like to just buy players on the open market, but you're having a long conversation, and I
Well,
think the quarterback showed so much this year, you'd have to
y-
highly entertain it.
John, I think we have to consider this too. It is an abnormally weak draft. And
Yeah.
I've said this, I would be much more willing to give a first round pickup this year than last year.
And they're picking what, 27, because they were in the NFC Championship game. So it's not even a high pick.
Yeah.
I
So I
give it.
just think,
Yeah.
yeah, this is one of these years. I said this um, this is the year if you really need. Now, it's a good year for edge rushers in the draft. It's funny. I don't think it's a bad draft. I just think it's a lot of second round players. I think there's about 7 to 8 great players, and then it's just a bunch of second and early third round players for the next
Yeah.
40 picks. But there is no Myles Garrett in this draft. So if you're a team that really wants to make a splash, I mean, the Rams went out and they got a Von Miller, and look, the Eagles have done this. They go out and just buy players. I mean that it's in the NBA. Every other draft is a weak draft. It's very rare when you have these days a really strong draft because the college, G League is stealing so many players. So many come from the international ranks that we don't know much about. I mean, we didn't know Luka was going to be this. We just knew he was young and played well against European pros. So I think. I think I would. I mean, if I was a team and had to give up a 1 and a 2 for Myles Garrett and a player, I would. I just don't think there's anything on the market like him.
Yeah. I think Cleveland's going to be in the position, unlike the Mavericks, where I don't think you can trade him for anything less than like a historic haul, like like a quarterback level haul. You're talking multiple ones, a two, some players, because they're in a weird spot, right? Because the Deshaun Watson contract is kind of an anchor on the franchise. So you
Yeah.
have to entertain trading him. Uh, but I don't think you can just give him away. Like, Devontae and Tyreek were traded for like a one and a two. Like that wouldn't be enough. So, and I think the bidding process, all it takes is three or four teams. I think whatever they would ultimately get would be pretty eye opening. And I think he would immediately sign the largest contract in the history of the NFL for a non quarterback with whoever traded for him.
By the way, Fubo, as you guys know, is my favorite thing, my favorite app to use. NFL, NBA. Go to fubo.com/Colin. I love it. I'm on it constantly. I'm flying to New Orleans tomorrow. I'm flying back from New Orleans over the weekend. I will be on fubo.com. It's just so easy to access, and a lot of airlines these days they don't have TVs. I fly a lot of American Airlines. They don't have even up front. I mean, I may get a shrimp cocktail and you don't, but I don't get a TV. So fubo.com/Colin. I love it. I use it constantly. I used it flying back from Chicago. Always delivers. College, pro sports, everything. They got news shows. They got comedies. Fubo.com/Colin. So the Cooper Cup is interesting. So listen, it was very obvious if you watch the Rams. The Rams have told Cooper Kupp, you're out. He immediately went to social media to complain, to curry some favor and some sympathy. I get it.
What did he? I missed that. What did he say? What did he
He
say?
basically said, "This, I don't agree with this. I thought I was going to end my career with the Rams. The Rams have notified me they're going to trade or look to trade me immediately." Listen, I really trust Sean McVay, and they just did not use him down the stretch at all.
He was a
And
blocker.
he was a blocker. And I had heard last year that he just couldn't week to week. He couldn't play back to back. Like if he played on a hard surface, he was just not going to. And I haven't looked up the data, but I was told last year they would have moved him last year if they could have. But the
Yeah.
season, remember, they caught fire at the end of the season, and then everybody's like, well, Puka's a rookie. But Puka is getting a little dinged up as well. They need a tight end and a receiver in this draft class. So they're going to be aggressive in the draft on that. Is there a market for Cooper Kupp? He's expensive. If Sean McVay bails on somebody, this is why I always said, when Kyle Shanahan bailed on Trey Lance and the Cowboys gave him a 4, just use your head. Kyle makes everything work at quarterback. Like, that's just the dumb move by Steven and Jerry Jones. It doesn't make any sense. If Sean McVay is out, I mean, on a wide receiver or a running back, like Cam Akers, he's like, I'm out. Well, Cam Akers is irrelevant or mostly irrelevant now. I don't know. I don't think Cooper Kupp has a market.
Well, to me, the problem is these older veteran players. He makes $20 million.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's a 31-year-old guy who's been banged up these last 3 years. So you can't, like, these type players get cut. Like Cooper, I didn't see the social media post, but they were floating it out last year during the season. This isn't shocking. You're making $20 million next year. And guess what? No one's trading anything of value for a 31-year-old who's making $20 million, who, great guy. I mean, in the peak of his powers was Super Bowl MVP, awesome player. But when you start getting injured and your production dips and you make a lot of money, this happens every time right before free agency. These guys get released because I think another team goes, maybe we strike oil and get him for $4 million and he gives us 75, 80 catches. But we're paying $5 million for that, not 20. So I think the Rams know what's inevitable, and that is cutting him because you can't even eat enough money to trade him. Like, they couldn't eat $5 million. Who wants him for 15? Like, to me, again, I'm educated guess. I'd say he's under a $5 million player right now based on his age and the injuries. Now, I was thinking about this the other day. Some of the bad teams, like the Raiders, the Patriots, you get a guy who's a Super Bowl champion, who's a high character, work ethic. You bring him in. Do you overpay? I remember when I was in the Bay, Reggie McKenzie bought Jordy Nelson, who was shot, but he wanted that type person in there. So maybe his market for crappy teams is higher. But if you're him, wouldn't you rather go play for a good team who don't, like the Howie Rosemans and the Gudikins? They're going to try to get you for $2 million. So maybe the Patriots overpay you, those type teams, for like 6 or 7. And that's where to me, he's got 1-year contract. Bad teams maybe overpay for the guy. Good teams underpay for hopefully a 1-year wonder situation. But he's been really banged up. I mean, he is just, and it's a testament to the way he played because he's closer to like Deebo Samuel in terms of taking hits, and he's a physical guy. He's not your typical like Edelman. I mean, he's going over the middle, getting crushed, getting right back up. Takes a toll. I admire the player, but I've seen this situation a million times. This guy usually gets released.
All right, so I touched on it at the very beginning. Have you ever had, I almost passed out the other day on TV. I'm fine.
Oh, and I was watching it live. I almost fell off the Stairmaster. I immediately start texting all your producers. I said, what just happened? Because I knew you were 5 minutes into your segment. So I'm in the business long enough to know that's not normal. And then, we had 20 minutes of ads, and then I was worried about you.
Yeah. Well, it's the nurse came in. Fox has, medical personnel on site. The nurse came in and took my blood pressure, and she's like, yeah, you're white and that's really low. So we need to lay down. And I was fine. I've passed out once in my life before. Have you ever passed out?
Never have.
Yeah, it's not great. You can feel it coming. You can feel it coming. It's like, okay, now this one, I didn't pass out. I got close to it, but the one I did before, I just banged my head on granite, had a big cut. I think people have seen that before. This one, I felt really close, but then I got on my knees. First thing I thought was, get on your knees. You don't want to do a face plant because the set is
off the chair.
And I thought, get down to the ground, get on your knees, get close, get to where, and I didn't. But it was, listen, for 5 minutes it was hairy. People sent, it was interesting. I had 3 or 4 different broadcasters go. Clay Travis texted me. He's like, dude, Friday on the air, it hit me in the last hour. He goes, I know what you're going through. He goes, I lost it. Just everything was fuzzy. And so I had a couple different broadcasters go, dude, I have the same flu, and I know what you're going through. So that part, consoling me, felt pretty good, but it's life. It happens. I'm going to New Orleans. Now, your first night in New Orleans tonight for you?
Yeah, I guess I'm right across. I was just texting a buddy on the Chiefs. Their hotel's right next to me. Just got here probably a couple hours ago, not even hour and a half ago. So might go get some cocktails tonight with some of the personnel people on the 2 teams.
Oh.
There's a lot of carryover here. I worked with a lot of people that now work for the Chiefs, but were with the Eagles and still some of those same Eagles. There's a lot of, Howie was the GM when I was there. So all these guys know each other. Obviously, Howie was Andy's GM. It's kind of crazy that this has happened now 2 out of 3 years. I think 2 years ago, you felt like, it was a big deal for Andy. This is the team that fired him. I think at this point in time, it's just a little more like another team. But I mean, this is still the team that kind of put him on the map. So I think Brandon Graham and Brandon Graham's the only remaining player that when he was there. So yeah, it's a pretty cool. I mean, when I was with Coach Reed, people forget it was clear like Howie was this young, dynamic, like just ambitious. Watch out, he's coming. But Coach Reed, there's a lot of negativity around him at the time. Bad game manager, could never win the big one. And at the time, like John Harbaugh was a star. That was his guy. Ron Rivera was coaching. Like that was his guy. Sean McDermott would go on later with Ron it was clear like Andy was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And I think you look back, you go, well, he had Donovan McNabb, who was a good player, but no one's comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. Mike Vick, the 1 year we had him, he's just kind of reckless, right? He'd get hurt. He was smaller, but he was an awesome talent. And Aaron Rodgers beat us in the playoffs, and that was the year he won the Super Bowl. And that Aaron Rodgers team, Clay Matthews, they had some really good players. But I think, the Kansas City situation, he's talked about like Bill Walsh now. I mean, that's the kind of the people forget too. Bill Walsh didn't win 5 Super Bowls. Bill Walsh retired after his third. George Seifert won 2.
Yeah.
So Andy's this is his 6th Super Bowl. And Howie's, I think, well established himself as not just one of the best, if not the best GM in the league. I mean, he's one of the best GMs in sports. I can't even, when he looked at that Luka trade, value, his big thing is value. That's the thing why he's so good in the draft, you're so good in free agency. He just understands price points, what I have to pay to get you, what I have to trade, what's a good trade. He's so connected with agents and other GMs. He's got like a Billy Bean quality. He's just smart.
Yeah.
And he's just go getter. So it's a small world. That time obviously changed my life in a weird way, led me here. But yeah, it's a cool game. Glad you're okay though. I mean, I text you, a lot of jobs, if you're a football coach and you start feeling that way, just banging out film, you can just lay down. You're live on air. I mean, were you looking and realizing, can I go 5 more minutes? You try to finish the segment. Were you thinking that in the back of your head with like a minute before you really had to tap out?
It was 6:18, and I looked at the clock, and I thought I got to get to 10, and at 6:28, I'm like, nope, I'm gonna pass out or puke. I got to go. So at 6:18, I looked at the clock and I knew I was in trouble. And then I just thought, I'm going to get through it. And 10 seconds later, I was like, oh boy, I'm sweating. It's bad. So it happens.
What did they say? What did they say? It's just a stomach bug or something?
Yeah, stomach virus. My wife had it. I got it. And she had it for 3 days. I had it for 1. And then I just slept for a day and I'm fine.
That's good.
All right, buddy.
I'll see you
Good
tomorrow.
talking.